Frankly, from the US side, I think with the previous administration, there was a lot of tension, a lot of piecemeal moves to try to have better or more constructive ties. Whereas with this visit, you really feel it is a reset, a look at the entire region. Let's not forget also in Saudi Arabia, there was the GCC US summit. So all the GCC countries were represented. And Kuwait, of course, had its emir there. You had very senior officials from all six of the GCC countries. So it is a reset. And again, these projects are long-term projects, long-term investments, and also looking at what security looks like for this region and the wider Middle East.
Indeed. And what we've also seen is essentially a push here to try and lock in some of these investment deals. The White House bringing forward the numbers. They are, of course, yet to be independently confirmed. But I'm curious to get a sense from you. Do you think we will actually see some of the pledges that have been announced following through and continuing beyond this administration, as you say?
I believe so, particularly because there are major companies involved. You have Nvidia, you have Boeing, you've had Microsoft having an incredible relationship with the UAE, where actually Microsoft invested 1.5 billion this way. And so these are companies, of course, that have to deliver for their shareholders. They depend on these sorts of projects to actually be seen. The follow through is there. That's why I said the public sector and the private sector coming together almost gives an extra guarantee, not necessarily just of success, but actually continuity and to your point, to see the follow through. So whether every single deal will come out as we see it now, I can't confirm from now. It would be too soon. But certainly for those that have been declared with some detail, then I would see yes, there would be follow through. And again, it's mutually beneficial. This is not just investment going from one side. This is actually projects and plans that are being done together with the US and the GCC. And frankly, they're in line with the major sectors of growth. So when you talk about AI investments, when you talk about setting up 5 gigawatt plant here in the UAE, then these are hugely important for the success of the UAE that is looking continuously and not only diversifying its economy, but making sure that it maintains the very high standards that it has within the country.
Mina, this is being watched with a lot of interest in the United States, but it's also being watched very closely by the likes of China and Russia. How do you think the optics of this are going to play on the world stage, particularly for those other Gulf partners?
I think that the UAE, the GCC in general, have always been clear about their relationship with the US. They've wanted a strong relationship. And when we talk about the security architecture of the region, it's not just, of course, about oil supplies, but that wider security architecture of the importance of this part of the world. And they haven't shied away from telling their Chinese or Russian partners that the US remains a very important partner for this part of the world. So I think that's there. They will, of course, want to know more details about the deals and also the political implications. But it's quite interesting because, of course, just ahead of Donald Trump coming here, there was that big announcement on tariffs with China. So there was an easing of the tensions between the US and China just ahead of President Trump coming to the region. I would say in terms of how they will read it also, Russia at the moment is in a different position with this administration than it was with the previous administration. So actually, again, they will see that in the current dynamic, they're not necessarily being challenged head on. However, of course, in the long-term strategic thinking, this is about great power competition. And the US, for this moment, is really seeming not only on the up, but a long-term partnership that will continue. This is a decades-old partnership that, as you said, has gotten a reset, but I don't believe at the expense of the ties with Russia and China that are quite considerable with this part of the world. And we've seen with both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the relationship of trust with Russia in order to facilitate not only Ukraine-Russia talks, but here in the UAE, the prisoners of war exchanges that have happened through us. And I think this part of the world is very, very interested in continuing that diplomatic role and the ability to mediate and broker, as all three countries have done.
Mina, we know that President Donald Trump is a transactional president, and that is his overall approach to foreign policy as well. But do you think Gulf leaders might have some sense of maybe even disappointment that some key foreign policy issues have not been addressed on this trip? So much of the topic of conversation has been about these investment deals, not so much the situation in Iran, the situation with Israel, the situation moving forward with Syria, for example. Are these concerns for these Gulf Arab leaders And how do you think the United States is going to approach some of these challenging foreign policy headaches moving forward, considering this hasn't necessarily been a core focus of the president's trip here?
Well, Syria certainly has been a focus in the sense that the Syrian president came to Saudi Arabia and met with Donald Trump. Donald Trump also spoke extensively about Iran and made very clear what the options are, that he's serious about a deal. Again, in Doha, President Trump spoke very openly, saying that the emir had urged him, and frankly, that is the position of all the GCC countries, had urged him not to go into lockerheads with the Iranians, rather to find a way to come to a deal and de-escalate, which is in the interest of everybody involved. And so that was part of the discussions. When it comes to Palestine and Gaza, again, in the GCC summit, all the statements were very clear about the importance, and the GCC Secretary General said this was the most pressing issue. So they have been on the table. Of course, it's the announcements that we know about. We haven't had a full readout from what was happening behind closed doors, but these issues are on the table. Because again, if we talk about long-term investment deals and prosperity for the region, that can't happen if you have a continued problem, frankly, in Yemen, and not only the suffering of the Yemeni people, but the continued lobbing of missiles from the Houthis, or on the other side, strikes coming in from Israel so close into the Red Sea. And so this is part of the discussions here, but I would say that the investments and the announcements that we're getting are metrics where we can feel the strength and the solidity of the talks that are happening, long-term importance for both societies in America and this part of the world in terms of job creation and so forth. But the geopolitical is very present.